How you doing, team? It's Sabmil here. Now, we've all been there. You've sat there, you've opened up your DAW, you're looking at this blank project and this horrible, daunting task of creating something from nothing is completely overwhelming. And if you're anything like me, that feeling just makes you go and watch anime until the early hours of the morning and eat too much. So I've come up with a template that makes it that little bit easier to get started. It does half the job for you. I've made it in Ableton, but if you follow along to this video, you should be able to make something similar in any DAW. So let's get into it. And this is it. So if you are on Ableton, this is available for download in the comments below. But if you're on any other DAW, just follow along and you can build something pretty similar using stock plugins. So my thinking with making a template like this is that everything's sort of there or thereabouts in terms of mixing, levels, sidechaining, things like that, and it makes that big scary task of writing something from scratch a little bit easier. So as you can see, I've got a pre-master and a reference track. Inside the pre-master, we've got two sidechain triggers, which I'll talk about in a minute. I've got a drum group, an intro group, a drop group, and a vocal group. So I'm going to go through these groups individually, explain what's inside them. So we'll start off with the drum group. So inside the drum group, we've got three groups: main drums, cymbals, and percussion. On the actual group, I've just got a saturator with a soft clip on. That's just to stop it from like going over zero. The main drums, again, another saturator with a soft clip on. And then I've got kick one and snare one, both at 0 decibels. I don't do much processing on the kick and snares because I just try and find good samples. You'll notice on all of my tracks, whether it's a MIDI track or an audio track, I have a glue compressor with a soft clip on with these settings and EQ8 loaded in. I'll show you how I use the glue compressor when I do the little demo at the end, but it can make a massive difference to your loudness potential and how loud you can get a track. So that's just the main drum group, pretty simple. Then I've got the cymbal group. On the actual group, I've got an EQ that's cutting off everything below 450. Anything below that on cymbals is useless. And I've got a little notch out at 3.4 kilohertz. That's that piercing frequency that babies cry at. Then I've got a sidechain that's sidechained from the main drums, so your kick and snare will sidechain cymbals. I've got crash at -12. These hats are panned left and right. I've got them leveled to roughly where I want them. And same for a ride. The ride's got a reverb on it because I use the ride to sort of fill out like the high end of my drops. So it's washed out at the back of the mix, but it's just filling out that spectrum. Then we've got the percussion group, and this is things like impacts. I've got a fill, a loop. So if I want to put in like a little drum loop or a amen break or whatever. The clap rack, this one's a little more interesting. So I have it as a drum rack and I'll put 4 different claps on here to build up like a sort of crowd of claps. And then I've got a group of a dry signal and a wet signal. The wet signal's got reverb on it. If you're doing this on another DAW, you probably have to do this through a send track or a return track or whatever. And then what I do is just adjust this level to bring in the reverb on that track. And then I've got build kick, build snare, same little reverb rack, and I've also got a frequency shifter. So what I like to do is automate the fine up towards the end of a build up, and it creates this sort of like nice bit of tension. Optional for you, but I've left it on there. So that's the drum group, pretty simple. Next, we've got the intro. What I like to do is I like to have my intros really dynamic and then my drops really slammed. So I process them differently. My intro, I'm a lot softer and gentler on the processing. On the actual intro group channel, I've got saturator with the soft clip on, again, to stop it from going over 0. I've got EQ8 dip at 200 Hertz, that's where you get that boxiness build up, and the same notch at 3.4 kilohertz. I've got a bass clefs easy washout. I'll leave the download for that in the description. I'll demonstrate how I use that in a minute. This thing here automates to 0 during build. So this is literally just utility with the width automating, and what I do is bring that to 0. So what that does is, like, as your build-up's getting towards the drop, it becomes more and more mono. So when the drop comes in and it's stereo again, it's more impactful. It makes your drop sound a lot bigger than it actually is. I've got main sidechain, which is from this sidechain trigger 1, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I've got an impact sidechain, so that's just sidechaining from the impact in the percussion group. I've got build kick sidechain and build snare sidechain. And as you can see, the dry wet on all of these is different. Trust me, it'll work. When I show you, it'll work. Then I've got the intro main group, which has got just a synth, which is a default Serum patch, just an init. I've got a piano rack, so It's a nice pretty piano. I tend to have pianos in tracks anyway, but it's a good little thing if you want to just like write something quickly on the fly. And then I've got sample 1, which is just an audio track. Then we've got the intro effects. So I've got an atmosphere 2, a couple of Foley tracks, a noise up on the left and the right. I like my white noise to be really stereo, so it's like really on the edges of the speakers and makes everything sound really big. And then I've got the noise downs in a group called ND delay. It's just got a little delay on it, so when stuff hits, it's like psh, 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 psh. Now I've got a couple of risers, and that's it. Now onto the drop. So in the drop group, we've just got a saturator, and we've got a compressor coming from the sidechain trigger 1. Again, I'll talk about that in a minute. We've got a drop main. So during my drops, I like to process the sub separate from my mid to high range sounds. So again, I've just got a synth 1 and a sample 1, which is just a default serum track and a default audio track. But on the actual main drop group, I've got a high pass at 100 Hz to leave room for the sub, and then a little notch at 200 Hz. Again, that's how you get that boxy build up. And then the sub group, I've got saturator, sidechain trigger 1 again, and then inside the sub, I've made a really basic serum patch, a bit of saturation on it, and then a high cut at 100 Hz. And if you're wearing headphones, you'll hear it's a thick, juicy sub. And the drop effects, I've got that high pass at 100 Hz again. Don't want anything clashing with the sub in the drop. I've got a chord stab, so I like to have, like, on the down hit of my things, just a little, and it's really quiet. I probably have to turn that down even more. I've got a siren, so this is another serum patch, and this is really good for having in the background with your drops to fill it out. It's really subtle, but it builds sort of hype, so the average listener won't pick up on it, but it's there in the background. We associate sirens with stuff going off, so it's there as an option. And we have a crowd track cut off at 450 Hz. Again, this is a bit like the ride. It just fills out that spectrum, makes everything sound really big. Again, noise up left and right, noise down in a group with a delay on it, risers 1 and 2, and all of these are just slightly louder than they would have been in the intro because the drop's louder. Then we've got the vocal group, glue compressor, we'll cut off at 100 Hz again because I don't want any mic rumble. And then on the main vocal, just got this really basic vocal chain, and this is literally copied from like a KSHMR video that he did for Splice. I'll leave the link in the description for that as well. That's all your groups. Then you've got a sidechain trigger here. So this sidechain trigger is literally an operator with white noise, but then I've turned it off here, so you want that off. Then that's obviously been sent to all the groups. So basically, whenever this hits, it will duck everything completely. Now, if you want that to be less aggressive, you can just turn this dry wet back. It's not my chosen way of doing sidechain compression. My preferred method is with sidechain trigger 2. Now, if you've downloaded this template for Ableton, you'll have to do this for yourself, but as you'll see down here, it's an external instrument, so this is making no sound, it's just a MIDI signal, and then I've grouped it 3 times: intro sidechain, drop sidechain, sub sidechain. Now, the way this is designed to work is with something like Volume Shaper, Shaper Box, LFO tool, or something like that. So what you'd do is you'd go to your intro group and you'd get Volume Shaper, put it on here, and then I'd turn that to MIDI one shot and draw in my shape for what I want. Maybe something like that. And let's make a little pattern. Then what I'd do is I'd control and drag that onto the drop, and then control that again and drag it onto the sub bass. What I tend to do is I tend to have a bit more breathing room on the sub bass, like so, just to give the low end of the kick or the snare, whatever, time to breathe before the sub comes back in. And then if you go on here, so the MIDI 2, intro, Volume Shaper, drop, Volume Shaper, and sub bass, Volume Shaper, and there, every time this hits, you will see, it's hard to tell, but you'll see this flash sort of white whenever that MIDI signal hits. But if you don't have LFO tool, volume shaper box or anything like that, you can just use the sidechain trigger that I've made in here. Just make sure it's turned off, otherwise you're just going to get a big blast of white noise. But you can literally just copy this, and at any time you want your sidechain to hit, it's a lot deeper and it ducks harder and it makes your drums really punch through. So that's the sidechaining part. Next, we'll go on to the pre-master. As you can see on here, we've got -15. And on this utility, we'll turn the master chain off for now, but on this utility, we've got +15. Now, you'll probably hear in terms of mastering, we talk about something called headroom. So you want between -3 and -6 decibels of headroom. Can be more, can be less. Some people just clip the frick out of their masters now, but this is how I do it. So what I do is, whilst I'm producing and writing and making a track, I'll have this utility on and the master chain off. And what that does is it brings all this to like 0 roughly whilst I'm writing. And then when it comes to the final mix and master, I can just hit this utility off and boom, we've got a good chunk of headroom, usually around -6 decibels. So it's like, it's pretty good. So I've got my own master chain that uses third-party plugins, but this is a good way of doing it with stock plugins. So basically what I've got is I've got a bass mono, which is literally a utility with the bass mono selected. So everything below 120 Hertz will be mono. Then I've got a gentle compressor, which is just literally the glue compressor, no soft clip on this time, and it's got like some pretty light settings. And then I'll just bring that down just so this is tickling, just to keep it smooth. Got a fattener, which basically this is meant to mimic sausage fattener, and I'll just have like a tiny bit of drive on it, which is mapped to the fatten. Then I've got cleaner, EQ, that's just cutting off everything below 20 Hertz, a little dip at 200 to clean up the boxiness, and a little dip at 3.4 kilohertz just to get rid of that piercing frequency. I've got a multi-band compressor, and all of these are separated with EQs into little bands. I'll show you how to use that in the little demo that I'm going to do in a minute. Then we've got gain stager, which is just literally like a light limiter. The gain is mapped to this makeup gain, so turn that up and push it into the limiter. And then finally we've got another limiter with this limit button mapped to the gain on the limiter. And basically all this is doing is it's just like gradual compression to bring up the loudness slowly instead of just slamming it all with one limiter. It'll make more sense once I've done a demo of it. Finally, I've got a reference track. So what you can do is you can drag in a reference track. So I've just dragged in one of my old tracks, and then what you can do is you can play, and whilst it's doing this, because this reference track's turned off, you won't hear it. But as soon as you click solo, and then you unsolo it and your track will play. And it's a good way to A/B between your track through the pre-master and a reference track. So that's how I've made the template. I'll do a quick demo now. If there's any parts that you didn't quite understand, or like you're struggling to find an alternative for in your DAW, leave a comment and I'll do my best to answer. So we'll start with the intro main. So I'm just writing something in A minor because it's all white keys and it's easy. Low res. This glue compressor, so basically the way I'd use these is I'll play this and I'll bring this threshold back just so this needle starts to move. So you see about there, tiny bit of movement, and then I'll just crank this makeup up until it starts to distort, and then I can back it back off again. And then if you look on this level over here, what it basically does is it pushes it right up against this -4 decibel ceiling. If you do this on like most of your tracks, everything's going to be louder in terms of perceived loudness. So your tracks will just master a lot louder. So I'm going to add another synth. I'm going to write a little melody in. We're going to do the glue compressor trick again. And the intro effects, so I'm going to do an atmosphere. Do some like Foley hits. One that I quite like is glass breaking. reverb, good old OTT. And then for this Foley, we could have like, I don't know, birds. Throw in an impact. Use one of the Virtual Riot ones because they always sound good. Now, as you can hear, because this is at infinity, it's just ducking it completely. So if we bring this back to, I don't know, 4, bring the threshold up. Sounds okay. Let's throw a vocal in there to make it sound good. So, okay, so let's see how this sounds.
Too late to leave, baby, spending all alone. I'll be every.
We need to make space for the vocal, so make a big cut there.
Don't be cold or alone.
Now we can just put the noises in.
Too late to leave, baby, spend.
The clap rack, use Virtual Riot samples again for random clap samples. That wet's way too loud, so just bring that back. Build snare in. What I could do is I'll make that fine. Build kick. I'm going to add a piano. So as you can hear, the intro sidechain during the build-up sounds really harsh. So all we need to do is we can just bring that back and the snare even lower, or make that downwards. Put some risers in. They sound very quiet, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that to -10. That to -12. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this track and use all the ad-libs from it, but we ain't got to do a lot of processing because it's already done. Now, if we go on here, we've got the bass clef easy washout. So if we do this, like so, and then the stereo width, pre-drop fill. So with the cymbals, we want to just ride the drop effects, put a chord stab in, put the siren in, crowd noise. You can just drag and drop the noises from the intro. 9 times out of 10 it'll sound just as good, but obviously the levels are different. Same goes for the risers. So I'm going to get rid of sidechain trigger 1 because I don't like using it, and I'm going to use the trigger 2. And all you've got to do is just line it up with where you want the sidechain to hit and then copy it over. And start putting in some synths. We'll do the glue compressor trick. And then obviously this has got no sub, so we can just copy that bass line down to the sub. Source stack, so white noise layer just to make it nice and bright. I don't like this snare, so. And now onto the pre-master. Turn this utility off, put this back on, put these to 0, and then we can play around with them. We'll try that 4 for now. Right, so as for these, what we want to do is we want to just bring that threshold so it's just tickling it. Turn the makeup off on all of them. I should have done that before. Okay, cool. And now all we want to do is want to push that up. Now we're achieving there minus 4.8 LUFS with stock plugins, which I think's pretty good. If we look at a span frequency spectrum, that's a good frequency curve. Now, obviously I can hear quite a bit of pumping. So what you can do is you just bring the kick and the snare down until it sounds bad. And listening to that, we might even be able to squeeze another couple of LUFS out of it. We've got minus 4 LUFS with stock plugins. Do you know when I first started producing, the idea of doing that was just not a chance. It's only took me like eight years. And there's like kids out there that have like been doing it like a year and they're better than me. But I am a YouTuber worth watching, I promise. So that's the template. Obviously, there's bits of tweaking here and there. It doesn't do everything for you, but it does a good job. If you have found this video valuable, please do go and watch my other videos. I've got a Serum sound design sort of workflow tutorial, and I've got a mixing and mastering tutorial. If you do like my content, please like and subscribe. It does help me out a lot. Throughout 2021, I will be making a lot more videos on a lot more subjects. But for now, check out the videos that are on the screen, and I'll see you in the next one.